This Fleet Equipment Unscripted interview is presented by Hendrickson, a leading manufacturer of heavy-duty suspension systems and components to the global commercial transportation industry. Visit hendrickson-intl.com to learn more.
Hi everyone, I'm Jason Morgan, Content Director for Fleet Equipment, and welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted. Today we're talking with Brian Romer, Business Unit Director for Hendrickson Composites. Brian, it is great to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Great to see you, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Now, my suspension knowledge is a little rusty, so I'm glad to connect here because we're talking about composite spring suspensions here. Can you give me some basics here? Composite springs, and it's not steel springs. What's the history on Hendrickson Composites, and what's the product?
Yeah, so we'll start out with composite springs. So everyone's familiar with steel springs, right? You know, using steel, form them, shape them. Composite springs takes glass fibers with epoxy and then a resin type curative mixture, and then it's molded into the shape, and then it's comes out of a mold as a composite spring, just like it sounds. And from a history standpoint, composite springs have been around, probably in the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
And a company by the name of Delphi Automotive was pretty instrumental with the whole concept of composite springs and the development side. And they were a big player in the automotive market, supplying springs to, some of the major OEMs, GM and Ford. And GM being probably the biggest user of composite springs for vehicles such as Corvettes, the old K car back in the day. And really it was a necessity as gas and oil prices started going up. The automotive folks started using the taking out weight as a means to offset that gas usage on the vehicles. So again, back in the 80s, very popular, and it continues to be popular today. Maybe not as much as what it was back then, but it is getting steam today with the electric cars that are really getting pushed out there in the marketplace. And, with the batteries being heavy and the car manufacturers trying to take weight out, they are really focused on, those big opportunities to take weight. And composite springs, the whole composite technology, not just in springs, is a key, unit for them to take weight out.
Right, for sure. So yeah, EV, and we're seeing a big development in the EV space on the commercial side as well, from the medium duty all the way up to the heavy duty. So that's one application example. Can you give me a few more? What types of vehicles in the commercial setting are these composite springs? Do you find them usually? And what applications are they going into?
Yeah, so most of the time, from an application standpoint, they're used on transverse front, so going from front wheel to front wheel in a transverse type of position, okay, as well as longitudinal on the rear. And then, if you talk about trailer, they're basically replacing the 2-leaf and 3-leaf steel springs that are used today. And where you might see them on the medium duty market with the transverse application, Mercedes Sprinter van, probably the biggest manufacturer out there. They're used 100% on the front of their vehicles. Okay. You got the Volvo cars. They're also used in that transverse application. From a longitudinal standpoint on the rear, the Fiat Ducato is a big user of that particular vehicle for some of their applications, as well as you see them on the Ford F-Series pickup trucks and the Silverado pickup trucks. They're in a little different application, but there still is a composite spring there to take weight out. And then, like I mentioned on the trailer product, replacing the 2-leaf, 3-leaf steel spring suspensions with the composite spring is another application where they're preferably seen that.
Okay, cool. Is that a component of the weight reduction in the trailer construction then, to get more payload out of it? Is that the goal of that?
Yeah, it definitely is. We see it, usually with those tanker haulers, as well as some of the beverage, haul type trailers, where they're really taking weight out and trying to maximize their payload. It's really more for weight savings, but as we'll get into it, there's some other benefits of the composite spring that a lot of people don't think about.
Well, let's get into it then. I mean, everyone is looking to lighter weight vehicles in some capacity across the board. You mentioned the EV side. Clearly, that adds some weight. But even in the conventional diesel world, commercial vehicles, we definitely want to still reduce weight there. How does that impact other aspects of truck operation, life cycles, TCO, ROI, that kind of stuff? How does composite springs work into that equation?
So as people think about composite springs, instantly think weight savings, and they're true. I mean, composite springs are anywhere from 50 to 60% of the weight of a steel spring in that particular application. So it's a pretty significant when you're looking for, a huge weight savings. Right. But along with the weight savings, one, you get the corrosion effect where you don't have a corrosion issue with composite springs, unlike what you have with steel springs. So, the folks that are, running their, trailers and trucks and automotive type vehicles on roads in the wintertime, and they're seeing all that salt being added to the springs, it tends to really have some rusting effect to them and does a lot of damage. But along with that, it comes along with, there's a safe failure mode when it does fail. So springs, tendency is it develops crack. You get some road debris coming up, hitting a spring, and you start to form a small little crack. And then when it actually does break, I mean, it's a catastrophic. It snaps, causes you to go to the side of the road, and then either get towed or hauled back to the shop. Well, with composite springs, because of the way they're made, the glass fibers run from end of the spring to end of the spring, and there's millions of glass fibers running in that spring. So when you do get that road debris that may come up and hit that spring, you're going to get just, a couple thousand springs that get damaged, not the entire spring. So a lot of times the user will see that sagging effect that you might see. Right. And then he has that ability to drive it to that location to have it worked on and removed. And then the last thing that we kind of see is steel springs tend to take a sag over time. They tend to slowly, sag just because of the nature of steel. With composite springs, we can take a spring that's 5-10 years old, bring it back into the shop, and literally it will fit right back into the mold that it came out of. Oh, wow. So it really maintains its shape over time. And again, that's what lends ourselves to be able to offer a longer warranty period for composite springs compared to a steel spring.
Right, for sure. One thing I want to go back to, because you mentioned corrosion. I know we are both Ohio-based, and when you said that, a chill ran down my spine, because snow is not too far away, and we both, I know, drive through the slurry that they put down on the road. So, what pops in my mind is maintenance, right? I mean, clearly cleaning that off is one thing that's always a common maintenance item when it comes to corrosion prevention. But what other maintenance needs might this have versus a conventional leaf spring that people might be more familiar with?
Yeah, and really other than the visual aspect of making sure that, there's not some severe damage, from road debris or whatnot, hitting the spring and causing those fibers, that run end to end of the spring to break. Right. Really, it's that visual inspection. Because you don't have the corrosion, because you don't have to wipe them down, spray off any, chemicals. It really is very limited from a maintenance need for the shop, and that provides a better service to the end customer, because they're not constantly spraying the vehicle down, trying to get the salts and off the springs to make it last longer. So really, it's very minimal from a composite spring standpoint.
Right. Well, and at the top of the conversation, you mentioned how composite springs have been around a little longer than maybe meets the eye. Definitely a lot of work has gone into improving them over time and getting to the product that you have today. Can you share anything for what you have coming down the line, or maybe what's ahead for the future of composite springs and composite products at Hendrickson?
Yeah, so again, as we talked about, the auto and truck and trailer market has really been pushing the marketplace, with taking weight out. and looking for those better performing materials. And as trucks and autos and trailers continue to push the whole marketplace, on the performance of materials, I think the composite group, the whole industry is gonna be an instrumental part of that going forward. And from a Hendrickson standpoint, where I see this going, Jason, is on the Class 8 market, we've seen composite springs come on and leave, and as they've kind of pushed that envelope from a performance standpoint, and sometimes composites doesn't live and meet those needs. But when you combine them with a steel spring, so you have, we call it a hybrid spring, where you take the steel spring and then you add a composite piece of that, and still get the weight benefits, still get the corrosion benefits, but then you get a performance of a steel spring and a composite spring. I think that's kind of where the market's going as we get closer and closer with pushing the envelope on composites. I see that being a big part of it going forward.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, even going back to the EV conversation, even on like a class 7, 8, or something that is doing those under 150-mile routes a day, and they are looking for ways to remove weight on those heavier EVs. We have an exemption that they can go up to 82,000 pounds right now, and that's all well and good. But being able to remove the weight, if not from the tractor, then the trailer side for sure. I mean, it's an interesting, I think we tend to simplify EV spec, right? Or what an EV is an EV, but that's really not the case. So anything that you can spec to optimize your payload and what you can haul there. I mean, this is an interesting example of how that might be worth a look now if you're getting into that EV space.
Yeah, it's we're definitely getting a lot of interest, especially from all the electric vehicle manufacturers out there, as they continue to work to drive down the weight of the batteries. The rest of the vehicle is going to come into play, and using composites in replacing the heavier steel, aluminum, I mean, it is going to be a big part of this whole EV movement that we're seeing.
Right, for sure. Brian, it was wonderful to learn more about this. I appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure I will call you and chat again soon.
Great. Thanks for having me again, Jason.